Welcome back, everyone. Rightio, so quickly into the next speaker, Tara, around staying ahead of evolving threats from the get-go with proactive intelligence. And I've asked my good friend ChatGPT to write up a little bio for Tara. So Tara, the enigmatic cyber puzzle master, fearlessly dives into the intricate web of digital challenges, leaving hackers awestruck as she unravels complex codes with mischievous smile and a cup of coffee perfectly balanced on her pinky finger. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you, that was lovely. Hello, everybody. Hello, good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a fabulous time here. And I'm so glad to see so many people after last night's late night party. So good to see you all. I am Tara Dharnikota from Melbourne, and I am really excited and delighted to be here today. I'm also lapping up all the sunshine I can because the weather in Melbourne is pretty awful, has been pretty awful for the last few days, at least before I left. So it's good to finally see some nice weather here. Actually, someone told me that the weather here is a bit chilly in Queensland, so I got some solid jackets, and after I came here, I realized the chilly in Queensland is not really equal to the chill in Melbourne. So anyway, I am making the most of it, getting the most sun as I can and the warmth, so really good to be here. I have been in information or cybersecurity for the last 15-ish years, and out of that, the last 10 at Telstra until last week, where I was leading cyber intelligence and red team over there. In a couple of weeks, I'm actually looking forward to my next new endeavor, where I'll be heading some pen testing teams, as well as risk management and awareness and influence teams. So I am very much looking forward to my next journey. So in this presentation here, we will be exploring the idea of proactive intelligence in cybersecurity. So when I think of proactive intelligence, I always think of like a cyber umbrella, right? And that protects you from the storm of threats before it even hits you. That's the way I think about it. And actually, when I think about it more, that's probably why a lot of vendors actually have umbrellas as swags. You just don't know. But we'll also be exploring the evolving cybersecurity landscape, the threats associated with it, as well as the cost of cybercrime. And we'll also be discussing how to overcome these challenges of staying ahead in an increasingly sophisticated world full of threats, and why reactive security may not always be the answer. And we're also going to look at strategies on proactive deep dive approach. And then we'll finish off with some use cases, of course, which is the most interesting part. So looking at, well, the last day or so across a number of presentations, you may have constantly heard the fact that there are heaps of cyber threats. So I'm not going to take too much time, but let's quickly look at some of the acts that seek to steal data, either damage data or generally disrupt the smooth operations of the business, right? The first one is the ransomware. As we all know, it's almost become BAU, where they increasingly target businesses and critical infrastructure. So think of high-profile attacks, such as Colonial Pipelines or JBS Foods. It cost people millions. It cost the business millions. So, and the next thing that I can think of is the physical or social engineering, as well as the BEC scams, right? And when I think of BEC, I immediately remember the biggest known BEC scam of all time. So this was a scam against big tech giants like Facebook and Google, where they collectively lost about $120 million. That's a lot of money. Just within a period of 2 years, between 2013 and 2015. And the man at the center of this BEC attack is Evaldas Rimisauskas. Believe me, I practiced that name quite a few times over the last few days. So Ramasauskas was actually sentenced to 5 years in prison for this BEC scam. So how did the world's most massive tech-savvy employees fall for this elaborate hoax? Ramasauskas and his team actually set up a fake company, and it was called Quanta Computer, right? Very innocent, but it was actually the name of the real hardware suppliers of Facebook and Google. And what they did then is they presented Facebook and Google employees with convincing looking invoices, like a BEC scam would do, and that was duly paid into their bank accounts, and the bank account was controlled by Ramasauskas, of course. So as well as fake invoices, the scammers also prepared counterfeit lawyers' letters and contracts to ensure the banks actually accepted the transfers as well. So the Ramasauskas scam till date stands to be one of the biggest, and it stands as a lesson for a lot of organizations. If two of the world's biggest tech giants could fall for this scam and lose millions of dollars in a 2-year period, it could happen to any business, right? So moving on, there's also third-party or supply chain attacks where they exploit third-party vendors and compromise larger organizations. Some notable incidents you can think of include SolarWinds and Kaseya. There's also insider threats like Nigel was talking about, where malicious and unintentional data breaches happen by employees, and there's a lot more risk with remote working as well. Nation-state cyber threats constantly think of cyber espionage and intellectual property theft, and they have more so been targeting critical infrastructure and political targets. And last but not the least, emerging technologies. So a lot of new attack vectors have been introduced in the form of 5G, IoT, as well as now AI. Like our lovely Lucas used the ChatGPT wisely. Yeah, there are a lot of hackers also doing the same, or adversaries doing the same. So it's been used for good as well as bad, but they do serve as new attack vectors, of course. So with the number of threats, you also have incidents come up, and this one here is the Splunk's state of art. The slides are this side. So Splunk's new State of Cybersecurity 2023 report, and it shows that steadily these well-known incidents have been increasing over the last few years. And not just that, look at the data breaches. The chart here is based on the official record of data breaches reported to the OAIC, which Nigel was talking about before me, the Office of Australian Information Commissioner. And that was obtained and published for the first time by ABC. And this one here shows a fantastic summary. I know you can't read much, but just looking at the bubbles, think of every bubble there in the chart as a data breach that put Australians at likely risk of serious harm. The bigger the bubble, the bigger the data breach it is, and smaller the bubble, of course, smaller data breaches. But it does show a total of 2,784 recorded breaches since the start of 2020. That's over a period of 2.5 years. And we've got so many breaches. And it covers everything from Optus and Medibank, which exposed the personal information of millions of people, and it comes down to also mistakenly sent mails only affecting a single unlucky person. So those are the smaller dots that you see. But again, this chart here, or the OAIC, is disclosure log, does not cover every single breach possible. It's just those that are reported, but it definitely highlights and magnifies the scale of the problem that we have. And of course, with the number of incidents, there's costs coming up, there's costs involved, and you would have seen the numerous charts that Nigel was showing before me. The cost of incidents caused by these illegal activities on the internet are set to surpass the $11 trillion mark by 2023. I can't even think of the number of zeros in $1 trillion. So forget $11 trillion. And by 2026, annual crime costs worldwide are meant to exceed $20 trillion, and that is an increase of almost 150% from 2022. So that's in a span of 4 years. And of course, this is not set in stone, it's just an estimate, but you could actually see the estimate growing steadily over time. So what exactly are the challenges that organizations face to stay ahead of the threats? So rapidly evolving threat landscape includes constantly changing TTPs or tactic techniques and procedures of adversaries, as well as new emergence of new attack vectors. And that's because of the new technologies that we were talking about previously. Also, lack of effective threat intelligence, as well as insufficient employee awareness. And obviously you can see 2 points mashed into one, and I deliberately did that because they both are correlated. And that comes up because of the difficulty in collecting, analyzing, and actually sharing that relevant threat data properly, and the inability to prioritize and contextualize threats based on the business impact. So again, you would have heard over and over that cybersecurity is a business problem. It's not specific, right? And of course, limited knowledge among employees or understanding of employees of security best practices is also a factor that could contribute to the threats. The third point is the compliance and regulatory challenges, and that's navigating through complex and sometimes conflicting cybersecurity regulations is a little bit of a pain, because you got to know how to balance the security requirements as well as the requirements or the needs from the business as well as operations. Limited visibility into networks and systems, and that's difficulty in detecting every single entry point within an organization. So if the bigger the organization, the more difficult it's going to get to find out every entry point and monitor those entry points as well. And how many of us have assets up to date, right? They are all outdated. How many of us actually take a proactive approach to finding out what assets are out there and making a note in the form of an inventory? Not many companies do that. So we have to actually catch up to that and be ahead of things. Resource constraints, again, there's insufficient budget, as we know, for cybersecurity investments. There's also limited availability of skilled security professionals. And again, Nigel touched on that before. There's a lot of skill shortage over there. And the last but not the least is a complex and distributed IT environments. So growing use of cloud services, use of mobile devices, 5G, remote workforce, everything contributes to the complexity of the environment. And there's also challenges on top of it in securing those third-party and supply chain ecosystems. So we already touched on this first point earlier about the emerging technologies. So we are going to be focusing on the threat, not the threat, but the intelligence as well as the awareness of the employees. So let's have a look at the reactive approaches that are practiced currently or perhaps traditionally. LastPass, so unfortunately, LastPass has had a few security incidents or breaches over the last 2 years, and it's not uncommon to get emails from LastPass, especially if you're using LastPass as a password manager, or your employer might have a tie-up with the company, so the employees can use LastPass as the password manager. But this is a very convincing looking phishing mail, as some of you would have guessed. It's got a different email domain. Traditionally, what the organizations are going to be doing is just block them and sometimes take them down and move on. But that is pretty reactive, because you're going to be doing this over and over again. Because phishing incidents don't last for too long, right? And new ones always keep coming up. So this one, think of it as a company X, which is a third-party company belonging to your organization, getting breached. You read about it a few days later on the newspaper or somewhere online that they got breached. You wait for a response from them. You never hear. You touch base and ask them, what's going on? Are we affected or impacted? And then they come back and say, hey, we're working on incident response. And then again, you wait for it. And then they come back again and say, hey, sorry for the inconvenience. You are affected, but we'll let you know what the impact is. And again, after a few days of hassling, they come back and say, yeah, there are a few employees in your organization affected, as well as some sensitive information has been taken by the adversaries. So what do? You get a list of those employees, get them to change the password, and move on. Again, that's reactive security because there's delayed response to threats. And that means detecting incidents after they have occurred, and also the increased time to contain and remediate those breaches. So, and there are more limitations, as you can see, the higher costs and resource consumption, because incident response is expensive, especially if you've outsourced it. You've got to get them to look at all the recovery efforts as well, and diverting, if you have a team of your own, you've got to divert those efforts from doing proactive stuff into doing reactive recovery. And then there's damage to reputation, and customers are going to lose that confidence in your company. And not just that, you might even, and your organization might even lose potential business opportunities. Inability to adapt to evolving threats. So again, like I was telling you, reactive measures often address a specific problem or an incident and not the underlying vulnerabilities. So they never get to the root cause of why it occurs and how do we stop it from occurring again. So that also leads to us to the second last point of compliance and legal risks. Again, it leads to a lot of potential fines. It leads us to penalties for regulatory non-compliance, especially if there is a security incident that you know of later on, and then there's legal liabilities, there's lawsuits, there's a lot of things that you got to deal with. And then last but not the least is reduced operational efficiency. There's obviously going to be downtime and disruptions because there's going to be loss of productivity from recovering from the incidents. So I think of reactive security as a Band-Aid to a wound, but instead, the proactive security is like actually having the armor on and preventing the wound in the first place. So when you look at it, while being reactive is more concerned with detecting incidents after they have occurred and the hackers have made their way into your network, the proactive security is going to attempt to locate any underlying vulnerabilities within your organization and seek to mitigate it and remediate it before even the cyber criminals exploit it. And it's very important to have that proactive approach. So let me introduce you to a concept of open source intelligence. I know some of you might practice OSINT. Some of you may not even have heard of OSINT. Now, OSINT is not open source software. It's not directly connected to DevOps, but it is basically collecting and analyzing data and disseminating the intelligence that comes out of it to the right audience. So the right audience could be your stakeholders across the business, it could be your direct teams, you could be helping your security operational teams, or you could be just informing your CISO or the director about threats. And then the OSINT can be obtained from a lot of public sources. And those sources are like social media, videos, listening to people's interviews, also social media and the likes. But I haven't done justice by squishing that fantastic picture into a corner of the slide, but I've actually got the link below, and that shows you a number of sources at a very high level. if you want to read through where OSINT comes from. And it's used by a lot of people, like government, private organizations across several industries, such as journalism, business, trend analysis, as well as cybersecurity. I mean, obviously, we're going to use this for cybersecurity because it's a cybersecurity conference. So OSINT can be done in a very non-intrusive and a passive manner, as well as given ethical considerations when you're doing, so you don't go and hack somebody to get information, but you do it in a very passive manner and give that privacy to the subject as well. So how do you leverage OSINT for proactive security? Now, there's a growing demand for proactive security. A lot of organizations have actually been purchasing that proactive security so they can have proactive monitoring in place. And there's so many benefits to it. So let's start off by looking at early identification of threats. What does that do? That allows you for timely remediation and it provides comprehensive situational awareness. And that enables organizations to make more informed decisions about the security posture. Not just that, cost-effective intelligence gathering, because you don't have to use fancy tools or specialized tools or have access to that restricted information. And it provides enhanced threat assessment because if you know the threats that are out there that organizations face, you can actually mitigate those threats with a priority when you find them outside in the OSINT world or on the internet. So improved collaboration between the teams, and that facilitates better sharing of information to address the right cyber threats. So some of the ways you can actually leverage OSINT is this one. It's non-exhaustive. Again, you can leverage OSINT for looking at and monitoring information disclosure. That could be credentials out on the forums and marketplaces. It could be on paste sites. It could be code leaks or sensitive code that belongs to your organization, ransomware leaks, or even any intellectual property data that's available online. Domain brand reputation, again, we were talking about the phishing campaigns, and if you take a step before that, and if you could actually prevent half the phishing campaigns before they occur, that's leveraging OSINT wisely. We'll talk about it in a second. Passive assessments, again, mergers and acquisitions, company assessments. So it would be great to help the finance teams to help them take those strategic decisions, especially if they know the company outlook or the company footprint. So it'll be good to get a good digital assessment of the companies, as well as third-party suppliers. Like a lot of companies have third-party suppliers. Why don't we look at the top suppliers and find out the risks over there so we can mitigate those early on? And brand protection of high-profile individuals. So high-profile individuals are those that are very visible within your company. That could be publicly famous, or they could be higher up in the company, those that would be handling a lot of finances, or even those that hold clearance. Somebody high profile, that would be a potential target. But if we could gather digital footprint about them, say, when they post pictures on social media, and provide it to them in the form of a threat assessment or digital footprint assessment, that would help them make more informed decisions about why they shouldn't post certain things that would leave them as a target. Oops. And then there are other things that you can do, such as proactive monitoring of threats, profiling the hackers or attackers beforehand, just to see if they might target your industry or your organization, providing the situational awareness of what's happening in the threat landscape to your company, as well as being a massive support to those overwhelmed security operations people or the CERT teams. Now, so if we look back on those incidents earlier in the slides, So again, the same LastPass mail, how do we look at it proactively? So as soon as a domain that looks suspicious is registered by an adversary or whoever, you check to see if it is suspicious, and then you block it in your proxy. Not just that, go have a little bit of a look around and research about the domain. Has the adversary created more similar domains? Is the adversary targeting your specific organization? And just find out more about it, gather some phishing intelligence so you would not receive it, and block them in the proxy so you would not even receive these in the first place. And what about those data breaches? Again, monitor proactively some of the sites such as code repositories, forums, marketplaces, ransomware leak sites, and anywhere else that's open source that you think your employees or your organization might potentially have the information in there, and then inform your employees so they can change their passwords, and take that opportunity to educate them about reuse of passwords using Password Manager, because I use LastPass. I used to use LastPass, but not after the breaches. So any Password Manager, and also being aware of the phishing links. So that would actually help you look at data breaches proactively. You don't have to wait for third-party companies to inform you that there are data breaches, and then by the time it's too late, a hacker might have access to those details and try and get into your network. So you'll be looking at all these proactively. So how do you implement proactive intelligence in your organization? So there are quite a few steps you can follow. Obviously, you have to clearly define your goals, objectives, and scope, and integrate OSINT into existing security processes. And how can you do that? You can determine the threats and the vulnerabilities that your organization aims to address. And the next step could be compiling a list of OSINT sources that is relevant to your organization's industry as well as the threat landscape. The third one is to actually create a plan for gathering intelligence from those identified OSINT sources. And this plan should outline information such as what type of information are you going to collect, what sort of storage requirements you're going to have, and what are the sources that you intend to collect that from, and so on. And you've got to integrate that into your current security process. So training of security professionals. So ensure that the security team is trained in how to use the OSINT tools and methodologies. And not just that, it's also the mindset that they have to take and understand how to gather that intelligence, gather the data, and produce that intelligence to enhance existing threat intelligence. Then, obviously, you get into the automation where possible, so you can automate and monitor some of the sources, and then prioritize the threats, because you would have gathered heaps of data. Which one do you mitigate? So you got to prioritize which one is a threat so the organization can wisely and proactively mitigate that threat beforehand. And you got to also establish that process for sharing the intelligence. Are you going to share it regularly? Are you going to share it real time? Are you going to have a dashboard? And then continuously review and update the process. Now, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. There are additional steps that companies can take, such as establish a dedicated team if you have the potential to do so. Make sure while you gather information, you adhere to privacy and compliance requirements. Also collaborate with the external industries so you can gather more sources of information. And perform regular threat assessments based on the current threat landscape. And this should obviously be a good feedback loop and establish that feedback mechanism, mainly to evaluate the effectiveness of the proactive intelligence program or function and identify those areas of improvement. And this is definitely going to help you optimize and refine the process and make sure it addresses the organization's needs, specific needs and objectives, of course. So in addition to that, what else do you need? Incorporate security awareness and a security awareness program and evangelists by having those engaging training sessions, workshops, real life examples, and empower employees as security champions and promote a security culture. Recognize and reward good behavior, and instill employee best practices. So again, drilling into the same fact, have a strong password management, MFA, phishing awareness, and safe browsing habits. Protect that sensitive information. Security conscious culture, foster that. Encourage open communications and incident reporting, because it's going to get employees to report more and more incidents. Reward them. You have to obviously get management support and those fast tracking the security initiatives by establishing a really good security awareness program and constantly assess and improve it. So the most interesting part, use cases. I've been told I've got about 4 minutes now, so I'll rush through it. Data breaches, as I was telling you before, monitor different areas of the internet, whether it is code repositories, page sites, whether they are forums and marketplaces, or anywhere else on the internet. Just have a look around to see what data is out there. Vulnerabilities. When you go to forums and marketplaces, you might see the adversaries talking about certain vulnerabilities a lot more. There might be chatter about certain vulnerabilities, and there might be interest in purchasing certain vulnerabilities. That's when you can go back to the organization and fast track patching of those specific vulnerabilities. Shodan, for those who haven't heard of it, is a really good search engine for network services that are exposed publicly. Go have regular look around to see, okay, what services that belong to your organization is exposed publicly. And you can go back and mitigate those if they're not meant to be facing externally. Again, we were talking about leadership brand assessment. Many times you can discover important information based on just subtle things in the background. And if you allow taking pictures, make sure you don't have anything that might disclose your information. Just not like these gentlemen here who have passwords at the back. So pictures they had posted on social media, pictures that people post on social media might yield some important information to adversaries, especially if they are targeting you. Location. So who remembers the Cisco breach that happened not so long ago? I'm sure many of you would, but it was a combination of techniques used by the adversaries, right? The Cisco breach was traced back to an employee's personal Google account that was syncing their company login credentials via Google Chrome browser. So if you had used Google Chrome for the first time, it'll come up with an option to sync. And by that, it means you can sync all the data that is right next to it, the apps, the passwords, the number of tabs, the history. Only because if you sync it and you have a mobile and you sign into your same account, you can carry the same tabs that were open as in your laptop. So convenience, yes, but security, no. Imagine clicking on a phishing link and that might download some browser stealing malware. So it's not just the password that an adversary could steal, but all these things that they could get hold of. So not a great idea. Very recently, actually not so recently, before COVID, I was going through my mails and a fancy looking email with a nice timeline came up. When I clicked on it, went to timeline.google.com, I was signed into the Google account. It actually showed me the history of where I went. I was astounded, as you could have imagined my surprise, because it did tell me that I went to Shepparton and I went to this Chinese restaurant, this particular Chinese restaurant for lunch, went to Hungry Jack's, stayed at this particular Airbnb, went to the soccer stadium so my boys could play matches all day and then get back. I had all the history in there. Imagine if a bad person knows about it. That's terrible, because if they want to cause harm or perhaps go rob the house when you're not around, very convenient. And to my other surprise, very recently when I purchased a laptop, I noticed, and I was playing around with the pictures, I noticed that I actually had a lot of pictures, and those were all synced to OneDrive. And then I realized that the Microsoft account, that was also my Google account, probably was synced to OneDrive, and that Google account was also logged in to my mobile, and the location was turned on, so everything's synced. So what I'm trying to say is be mindful of what's out there about you. Constantly review your privacy and security settings, because it's going to be very useful for you. Because if an OSINT team can do it, the hacker is constantly going to be spying on people and trying to get the most of what they can get. So again, remember the importance of proactive intelligence and OSINT, the shift left mindset, and the role of employee training, because it's very important. And don't forget, proactive security is like sunscreen, better to prevent damage than relying on aloe vera or aftercare. So let's encourage organizations to invest in proactive intelligence, either into security processes that are existing, or to think of a dedicated OSINT team and stay one step ahead of threats. Thank you very much for your patience and for listening to me.
Thank you, Tara.
You're welcome.
So while we get Angelo and Meg to come up to the front here when you're ready, I might take a couple of questions, and none online. Are there any questions in the room? No? Would you like to hear a really terrible joke?
Yeah, please.
This one's for Mark Kerry Smith, is still around, backed by popular demand. Why did the cyber intelligence analyst open a bakery?
Oh, I can immediately think of a video that was floating around where someone was doing some OSINT, because I think people connected to the free Wi-Fi in the bakery. No, I'm digressing. You go.
Because they wanted to specialize in cookie intelligence.
That was a good one.
All right, can we all give a warm round of
Thank
applause
you.
to Tara for her brilliant presentation?